I'm going to show you how I ruined a perfectly good lo-fi track with complexity. Maybe I ruined it for the better, maybe for the worse. Let's start at the beginning. In April of 2021, I was using this organ behind me here to record improvisations. These old Yamaha organs have full MIDI connectivity, so you can record the pedal board and the two keyboards independently into their own tracks in Ableton. I started with a drum loop to get a pulse to play off of. Kick on beat 1 and snare on beat 4. By omitting the snare on beat 2, it gives it a pseudo halftime feel. To fill in all that empty space, I used Superior Drummer to add a washy ride cymbal and hi-hat. On the lower keyboard, I started playing two minor 11th chords, F minor 11 to A flat minor 11, back and forth with no connecting chords. Then I started adding little melodies and riffs on top. Then I added the roots of the chords with a bass. And here's why the organ is such an incredible improvising tool. I just played the bass part in with my feet, although it is a bit of a juggling act. I've got the drum loop going, the bass notes are being played on the pedal board, and the chords are being played on the lower keyboard with my left hand, which frees my right hand to play a melody on top. In this case, a lush string sound. I was listening to Henry Mancini's Lujan on repeat around this time. Let me know if you know that tune down below. My favorite thing about improvisation is that it forces you to stay simple. There's no time to get overly complicated. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, now I'll play a little piano solo before I make my way back to playing that melody with the string sound. The piano sound is built with 3 layers: a clean grand piano, a modulated version of the same sound that has a lo-fi character, and a marimba layer that adds a wooden attack to the sound. Here's all 3 layers together. There is also an arpeggiator playing a wooden mallet sound triggered by the keyboard. This adds a consistent rhythmic pulse to the harmony. To close out the improvisation, I made my way back to the string sound and repeated the melody as best I could remember it. Now here is where the ruining begins. I came back to this project a few days later and hit play. I liked it enough to put it on the back burner, but had a few immediate thoughts. It's a nice start, but in order to consider it finished, I'm going to need to take that very simple drum loop that was essentially functioning as a metronome and turn it into a drum part that interacts with the rest of the parts of the song. Also, the chord progression that starts on F minor 11 then teleports to A flat minor 11 needs to be fleshed out by adding connective harmony that bridges the two chords. And finally, I'll need to turn that bass line into something far more interesting, something that adds to the rhythm and groove of the song rather than just providing the roots of the chords. Now in retrospect, I can see that at this point, I'm immediately signing myself up for a ton of time and work to implement things that I think will make the music more interesting. All of these things are mainly technical. They're going to make the music more complicated, and I'm subconsciously associating that with the music being more impressive, and therefore better. I'm making a default decision here that more complexity will result in more sophistication. As easily as the improvisation came, essentially in real time, I knew these next things would be pretty labor intensive, and I instantly put it off. As is usually the case when I go down this rabbit hole, I instantly feel like I have to redesign all the sounds. The piano has been completely replaced with an Oberheim-inspired sound made with Ableton's wavetable synthesizer. I've moved the piano solo to a separate track, and it's now being played with a Rhodes sound. The lush string sound has been replaced with a simple single oscillator synth sound. At this point, it's pretty clear that I've drifted far away from lo-fi territory. I'm well into fusion land. And if one of the parts is going to have a lot of detail, it means that all the rest of the parts are going to have to rise to that level of detail. The tempo has increased to 120 beats per minute, and the harmony is no longer moving between these two clouds of notes, F minor 11 to A flat minor 11. Instead, these two chords are just the arrival points, with many chords bridging to and from each of those harmonic destinations. This is done using two techniques, chromatic motion and dominant harmony, both of which will be topics of future videos. Let me know what you know about those two ideas in the comments. One way to make this adventurous harmonic approach sound cohesive is to derive all of the motivation for the harmonic choices from the melody. Even still, when the harmony borders on outlandish, you can turn to the bass to ground it and justify the choices. Here's a good example of the chromatic motion in the bass line, as well as how the bass can fill in the rhythmic gaps to add to the groove. The drums have come a long way from that original simple loop. Now everything in the drum part is derived from a bass rhythm, a melody rhythm, or a chord rhythm, and otherwise leaves space or silence. Now, in the midst of all this arguably unnecessary complexity, there was one thing that I'm pretty sure I never would have created if I hadn't gone through this path. It's this gliding synth part that I actually really like. This all started as absolute improvisation, but now we're well into compositional territory. The two blend and overlap, but they constitute totally different approaches, each with their own tools and results. At this point in the process, I'm remembering that original sketch with its kind of film noir quality. I'm wondering what I've lost and what I've gained. As if things weren't tedious enough, I decided to take the chords and arrange them as individual voices, the way you would for a saxophone section of a jazz band or a string section of an orchestra. Basically, you're still communicating the same rhythmic and harmonic information, but now instead of approaching it as vertical blocks, you're now prioritizing the individual melodic activity of each voice. In practical terms, voice 1 will be the top notes of the chords, voice 2 will be the second from the top note of the chords, and so on. One interesting thing that this approach allows for is that if you had two instruments repeating their own same notes, instead of having that monotonous repetitive line, you can exchange their notes to create a more interesting melody for each instrument. The individual voices are not so apparent when they're being played on this same Ableton wavetable synth. So I recorded it with my Behringer Neutron and adjusted the filter and wave shape and wave position for each voice. This gave it a little bit more individuality and mimicked the horn section or string section that I referred to. This is also enhanced by panning, so that voice 1 is in the center, voice 2 and 3 are left and right, voice 4 and 5 are also left and right, and so on. With the synth parts now recorded on an analog synth, the synth bass line sound wasn't really working for me, so I re-recorded it with a fretless bass. And I recorded what was the original piano solo on guitar. I also faded each of the guitar notes in to blend them with the synth texture. After all this, I honestly can't really tell you which one I prefer. I really like the moodiness and the mystery of the original improvisation, especially the string sounds and the lo-fi piano. But I also like a lot of the nuance and detail of the one that I fleshed out. So I decided to release both of them. The song's called Before My Time. The original improvisation is Before My Time Noir version, and the composed one is Before My Time Fusion version. You can listen to it wherever you stream music. You'll find the links below. And you can also listen to it here on this channel. If you're interested in one-on-one sessions, I offer lessons over Zoom. Email me at jarenlessons@gmail.com for more info. Also, check out my Patreon, where you'll get access to downloads of all the project files from the videos you see on this channel, access to the weekly beat battle, stems, presets, samples, and more. In fact, you can find samples from the improvised version and composed version of the song up there right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.